Hello, fellow instrumentalists. I'm Jacques Gadway, and this is the first trial of Vivaldi's Summer. In this video, we'll look at the first companion etude from my packet of preparatory work for the Presto of Vivaldi's Summer. That's a long title. I'll workshop it. The goal of this etude is to address perhaps the most obviously difficult thing about the Presto from Vivaldi's Summer, which is the sheer agility required in playing all of the scales. This etude number 1 is comprised of 2 pages. On the first page, there's a box filled with some information that is just supposed to explain what you're supposed to do with this etude. One bit of information is the explanation of what the X note is. Generally, in my arrangements, when I write a note with a note head that is an X, I use that to indicate a chop. However, in this etude, I explain that the X note does not indicate a chop, but rather indicates what I call a dead note. All that a dead note is it's when we place the bow rhythmically on the string without causing too much of a noise. And the purpose of these dead notes is to habitualize the rhythmic placing of the bow on the string. In the Presto of Vivaldi's Summer, most all of the fast scales start on the second 16th note of a grouping, or in other words, the E of a grouping, one E and A. The dead note placement is a crucial habit to develop in order to crystallize pulse and starting on the string. If you look at the first page of the etude, all that it is 7 different variations to be used on the second page. Each of these variations is simply a way to play each measure of the second page. So if you look at this first variation, you can see that it's just playing the notes détaché starting up bow, and that's actually exactly how the entirety of the second page of the etude is written. The second page of the etude is the actual meat of the study. If you look at it, it just takes you through measure to measure through different variations of the scales. So we start on a D, going down in a natural G minor scale, and then we have a G melodic minor scale with the introduction of the F sharp here. And all this is just to train your fingers into the quickness of scales that are likely to occur in the Presto of Vivaldi's Summer. Also, we keep creeping up, causing the bow and fingers to have different rhythmic changes across the strings. The first thing you want to do when you're practicing this etude is you want to learn this second page, détaché, with the first variation. So you just essentially play it relatively slowly until you get it very, very comfortable. After the second page is comfortable, you start to superimpose each of the variations on it to different ends. Part of what makes the scales in Vivaldi's Summer so difficult is that our bow must cross the strings at inconsistent intervals. Sometimes our bow does string crossings on strong beats, like in measure 112. So each time we're crossing from a high string to a lower one, we're doing so on a relatively strong beat, the second 8th note of the beat, or the and, 1E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, 1E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, 1. Got a little confused there, but you get the point. In measure 10, we also have a change on the strong beat if we use 4th fingers. Right, we're string crossing on strong beats, E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a. Whereas in measure 12 and other measures like it, we're changing on a weak beat. In this case, we're changing on the of the beat, or the 1E and a. If we're using the 4th fingers for this descending scale. When playing these scales, I would suggest using either open strings or 4th fingers. I would not mix and match within a scale, because that causes your string crossings to be inconsistent within a measure, which can be quite confusing for your muscle memory. For example, if we look at measure 10, we wouldn't want to use open A and then not an open D. Open A, then a 4th finger. That would be wildly uncomfortable for the bow to learn. Likewise, in measure 12, we have to use a fourth finger on the E flat because we can't use an open E, which means we're going to go ahead and use a fourth finger on the A as well. That way also, our bow gets used to the pattern within that measure. We're going to be changing strings on that up bow on the of a beat, one E and . And of course, in context, we will not be enunciating it. We're just simply doing that for the purposes of demonstration. We would want it to sound very fluid instead. One note is that in measure 10, when I play this piece, I go ahead and use open strings, even though it results in an off the strong beat change of strings, simply because generally open strings are going to sound cleaner. At the very least, we know that because we're using open strings on the A and the D, we're keeping a consistent bow coordination. Now, if we go back to the Etude and look at variations 1 through 3 on the first page, we can see that the rhythm stays consistent, but we change the bowing. We have détaché in variation 1, and then we have slurs in variation 2 of about a beat long. And then in variation 3, we have smaller slurs. This is definitely the most difficult. Each of these is going to train our bow and body to change in different ways across the string. When practicing the Etude, you're going to use each of these variations on the second page. So you'll turn to the second page of the Etude, and you'll first learn all of this détaché, Just remember, if you use a fourth finger, you're supposed to use that fourth finger throughout that measure. If you likewise use an open string, you should use that open string throughout that measure. So for example, in measure 5 of the Etude, this is the second page, we're going to be using a fourth finger on that E flat. So we're going to be using a fourth finger on the A and a fourth finger on the D. And each time we're going to be using fourth fingers because we're always going to have that E flat until it changes in measure 9. And of course, when we're in third position, we're always going to use fourth fingers because there are no open strings that we're going to be using throughout those scales. Just a heads up, one of the most challenging things in this Etude is using variation 3 upon measure 5. For some reason, I myself have found that to be particularly challenging, but each time I practice it over and over again, the coordination seems easier and easier. So as you see here, variations 1 through 3 are used to develop some coordination between the left and right hand and train the body to play with various bowings. Variations 4 to 7 are the heart of this Etude. They are the various different rhythmic combinations you can superimpose on these scales in order to really build agility. When trying to build agility in violin playing, there are 3 methods that generally work. The first method, and perhaps the most common, is the method in which you do the metronome walk. This is where you start at a slow tempo on the metronome. And you very gradually creep your way up, almost like climbing up a ladder, until you reach a tempo that is your goal. This can take a very long time, and often, in my opinion, causes the student to run into a development wall. Essentially, they reach a BPM that they just simply cannot pass. The second, less common method used in increasing tempo and agility is something that I've heard described as the half-tempo method. This is a method in which you practice with the metronome set at your goal tempo, but it represents half the note value. So if your goal tempo was 120 BPMs to the quarter note, you would set the metronome at 120 BPMs, but it would instead represent the eighth note. So essentially, you're practicing half the tempo of your goal. In order for this to actually work, it requires the student to do this for a very long time. You have to practice at this half tempo for quite a while, continuously logging healthy repetitions. it also requires the student to have a clear understanding of their finger placements. Just because the metronome is slow does not mean the fingers are. So when you place the fingers using this method, we still place them quickly. We still lift them quickly. And most importantly, we keep them close to the string. 3 and... The way I describe it is even though we're playing slowly, we're building fast habits. Perhaps the best way to build fast habits in the hand is the final way, and probably one of the most respected ways of building up agility. And this is, of course, what we're using in this etude, which is the use of rhythms. Rhythm practice can be done in a variety of ways. Many people write out the specific rhythms, as I have done in this etude. If we look at variations 4 through 7, each variation has a specific way of organizing the rhythm of the bar. In variation 4, for example, it is the fourth note of every grouping that we're holding. And then we play quick notes again until the fourth note of the next grouping, and then we hold again. Now, even though the rhythm is written out this way with 16th notes, quarter notes tied to other 16th notes, that does not mean that that is exactly how we have to play it. It's important when practicing any kind of technique that we understand the whys of what we're doing. We benefit from rhythm practice like this because it naturally builds upon fast habits. Because the fast notes have to be fast, and the long notes do not. When we're having difficulty with a fast section, it's often not because our fingers can't move that fast. Rather, it's often because our mind can't catch up. When we're playing something extremely fast, the reality is, most of the time, we're allowing habit to take over. We're allowing muscle memory to do the bulk of the work. The brain shapes our phrases, but it doesn't directly tell each finger to move every single time. We just simply can't think that fast. At least not with conscious thought, which is why we have to allow our unconscious thought to take over. When we do rhythm practice, what it allows our body to learn is that it gives our mind time on the slow notes to think the next grouping of notes, and then it trains our body to play the next grouping fast. In order to benefit the most from this rhythm practice, it's important to do two things. The first thing is when you're playing the long note, take as much time as you need, because the ultimate purpose of the long note is to give your brain time to buffer. You have to use these long notes, almost like fermatas, and use them to think about the entirety of the next group of fast notes. If by the time you start the next group of fast notes, you have not fully comprehended them, your left hand is going to stumble, and you're not going to benefit from the rhythm practice. So the reason that I say this is because even though variations 4 through 7 have specific rhythms written out, I'd rather you think of this as fermata/grace note practice. In other words, we're thinking of these long notes as tools. We're going to lay on them as long as we need in order to fully process the notes yet to come. And then the fast notes, in order to continue building fast habits, we have to play those as quickly as we possibly can. So in conclusion, when doing rhythm practice, we want to fermata, hold the long notes, process what is yet to come, and then we want to crush the fast notes, play them as quickly as possible. If we take a look at the first rhythmic variation, this is variation 4, we can see that we're supposed to hold that fourth note of each grouping. Again, we don't have to do this in exactly the rhythm that's marked there. That's just to help show you how we want to feel the fast notes. So in this case, we want to feel the fast notes like E and A, E and A, E and A. And so I'm taking as much time as I need during the long notes in order to fully conceptualize the notes yet to come. The next group in measure 2 of the etude, as we see here, we need to think 3, 2, 1, 0. 3, 2, 1, 0 with a high 2, natural 1. 3, 2, 1, 0 with a low 2, natural 1. We prepare 4, 3, 2, 1. This is a flat 4. 4, 3, 2, flat 1. This is a natural 4. 4, 3, flat 2, 1. So we don't necessarily have to hold the long note. It's just there to give us space, so you can actually pick the bow off the string and replace the bow in a comfortable part so that you can play the fast notes very quickly. And then we can move on to variation 5, which is the very first note being held. And then we're feeling the fast notes as and a 2E, and a 3E. We're thinking about the next 4 notes, 2, 1, 0, 3, and we're thinking about exactly the versions of those fingers. It's a natural second finger, it's a flat first finger, and it's a open string, and then a natural third. And we're preparing all of those so we can crush those notes. Then we have a F sharp, E natural, D, C, and we're going to crush those notes. And then we're going to have a low B flat second finger, A first finger natural, and then we have our last G. And we're crushing those notes, practicing those fast habits. But again, we're taking as much time as we need on the long notes. The most important thing is that we have fully conceptualized the fast notes yet to come. We do the same thing with variations 6 and 7. We just take a different note and elongate it. In variation 6, we take the second note and we feel the next fast grouping as, a 2E end, a 3E end, a 2E end, a 3E end, a 4, because there's no more notes after that. And again, we're taking that long note, we're pausing as long as we need to fully conceptualize the next notes, not just exactly the rhythm of them, but the actual specific placement. A 2E end, but we're thinking B flat, that's a low 1, open A, G natural, F sharp, that's a high 2, a 2E end. Then we have E natural, open D, C, B flat, a 3E end. And sometimes you can go back and pick it up again to make sure that that grouping of notes that you're crushing is extremely clean. The final variation, variation 7. In this grouping, we're holding the final note of each beat, and we're feeling the fast notes yet to come, 2E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a, 4. And with all of these variations practiced on top of the etude, we will start to feel that our coordination and our quickness of scales begins to improve when we practice our Vivaldi. We can even go a step further and practice any of these variations upon the scale measures within the Vivaldi. For example, we can look at variation 4 from the etude. This is the one where we hold that second beat. It's the very first of the variations. And we can take that variation and apply it directly to summer. If we look at measure 10, we would skip over measure 11 because it's just the same note. And then we can apply that directly to measure 12. We're thinking of the fast notes before we start. 2, 1, 4, 3, G, F, E flat, D. Let me try that again. Then we think of the next notes, and the next. Again, we're taking as much time as necessary during the fermata or hold in order to give us time to fully conceptualize the fast notes yet to come. We can also add the bowings from variations 2 and 3 in the etude, or that third variation, which is perhaps the most difficult. Yeah, that's the hard one. We can use it here as well. This is measure 21, 22, 23, 24, or the other variation. Or any of the rhythmic variations as well here in measures 21 and 22. Through dedicated practice, and depending on your level, you could conquer this first trial in anywhere between 1 to 4 weeks, creating comfort and agility within the scales of Vivaldi's Summer. If you want to download this specific etude or the encompassing packet, you can do so on my website, gadwayviolin.com. You can of course instead just pause the video when the music is on screen and use it that way, but downloading it from my website is probably the best way you can support the channel if you like what you're watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and please leave any questions down below and I'd be happy to answer them.